Welcome to Hannity, and this is a Fox News alert. Despite the rise of radical Islam that we are witnessing now in the Middle East and beyond, the White House is now doubling down on its accomplishment of decimating al-Qaeda. Now, just yesterday, our very own Ed Henry pressed White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest about this exact thing. Well, here to tell us all the details of this, Fox News White House correspondent, the one and only Ed Henry. You're pressing these guys hard. They must be getting mad at you.
Well, maybe a little bit, Sean. What's interesting is that Jay Johnson, the President's Homeland Security Secretary, gave a speech in Canada yesterday listing all of the terror threats. It's obviously an important thing to warn not just the American public, but the world about what's out there right now. He talked about ISIS, of course, talked about al-Qaeda affiliates, which the President has warned about many times around the world, but then also listed core al-Qaeda inside Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Homeland Security Secretary said. Did not mention that they had been decimated, as the President has said many times. So I asked Josh Earnest, what is going on here? Are they shifting policy? Are they shifting message? Listen. Is the administration signaling that core al-Qaeda is no longer decimated? That they are part of this threat matrix?
Ed, we stand by what is demonstrably true. That core al-Qaeda, that network that previously existed along the border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, has been decimated and destroyed.
So note, they specifically cite along the border they've been decimated. It leaves open the possibility of core al-Qaeda elsewhere around the world could be coming back. Now, the other big security issue, obviously, is how is the President's strategy in terms of trying to decimate ISIS now. And remember, the President has faced criticism about why he pulled out troops from Iraq, why he didn't leave a residual force behind. What's changing now, it's not just Republicans saying that. His former Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, has a new book out saying that they could have gotten a status of forces agreement with then Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki. Panetta saying, though, that the White House pushed back on Panetta's effort to get that agreement. Panetta writing that basically, quote, the President's team at the White House pushed back and the differences occasionally became heated within the administration, he was saying, and those on our side viewed the White House as so eager to rid itself of Iraq that it was willing to withdraw rather than lock in arrangements that would preserve our influence and interest. Interesting, because it's now criticism coming from within some of the President's insiders. Today, we should note, though, retired General David Petraeus, who was the architect of President Bush's surge in Iraq in 2007, gave a qualified endorsement of the President's strategy currently against ISIS, saying, quote, there's a reasonable chance of success. Not a ringing endorsement, but a qualified endorsement, Sean.
All right, Ed, very informative. Thanks so much from the White House tonight. Meanwhile, frightening news about the latest threat from ISIS. The U.S. Army is now warning military personnel about the terror network targeting their family members. Fox's own Catherine Herridge has the very latest, all the details from Washington tonight. Catherine.
Sean, Fox News has reviewed a special assessment from the Army Threat Integration Center, which issues early warnings of criminal and terrorist threats to Army commands worldwide. The advisory warns military personnel and their families to be vigilant after the Islamic State, also known as ISIS or ISIL, called on its supporters to target their homes. It reads in part, ISIL has called on lone wolf offenders in the U.S. to use the Yellow Pages, social media sites like Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter to find the addresses of service members, show up at their homes, and slaughter them. While there's no independent corroboration of the ISIS threats, the bulletin advises more than a half-dozen precautions that include urging service members to limit access to their social media profiles online. This week, the Pentagon said the airstrikes has ISIS under pressure, at least in the short term.
That's a good thing, because if they aren't operating as freely, then they aren't as free to achieve their goals. That doesn't mean ISIL doesn't still pose a threat.
In a statement, the Army told Fox News that force protection levels have not changed, but the bulletin is a reminder to remain vigilant. Separately, a military source said these warnings are taken seriously because increasing the cost of security is a strategic goal for the al-Qaeda senior leadership. Sean?
And Catherine, thank you. Meanwhile, President George W. Bush is back. The 43rd President of the United States sat down with Fox and Friends co-host Brian Kilmeade earlier this morning, and among a wide range of topics discussed was the current crisis in the Middle East and this warning that he made back in 2007.
Begin withdrawing before our commanders tell us we are ready would be dangerous for Iraq, for the region, and for the United States. It would mean surrendering the future of Iraq to al-Qaeda. It'd mean that we'd be risking mass killings on a horrific scale. It would mean we allow the terrorists to establish a safe haven in Iraq to replace the one they lost in Afghanistan. It would mean increasing the probability that American troops would have to return at some later date to confront an enemy that is even more dangerous.
Today, 7 years later, the former president's prediction has now become a reality. Now take a look at what he told Brian earlier today.
I know the nature of the enemy. Anybody who kills 3,000 innocents and beheads people because of their religion or because of their point of view is dangerous. And there's a short-term strategy, which is to bring them to justice, and a long-term strategy, which is to encourage free societies to prevail so as to marginalize their ideology. The long-term strategy just takes time. Americans have got to understand that the lesson of 9/11 is still important today as it was right after 9/11, and that is the human condition elsewhere matters to our national security.
Here with reaction are the Wall Street Journal's Jason Riley, the Weekly Standard Stephen Hayes, and outnumbered co-host Kirsten Powers is with us. Let me set the stage for my question this way. The president's, the president's JV comment, the president a month ago saying it was a fantasy to support the Syrian opposition, pharmacists, doctors, and that comment that he made, blaming the intelligence community on 60 Minutes, the intelligence community firing back, no, we warned the president in granular detail on ISIS and what would happen in Iraq, like what President Bush said. How do you make that many mistakes? These are monumental.
Well, I would argue that he was right on Syria and that he's changed his position to the wrong position. So he was originally right that there really were no rebels. That
he was right a month ago.
He was right. Yeah, well, that was his position even preceding a month ago. I mean, that has been his position all along, that there really were no rebels that were in a position to, at that time, remember, we wanted to overthrow Assad. We had a completely different purpose for it. There really were in no position to overthrow Assad. So I think he was right. He shouldn't have changed his position.
A month ago, he was saying that it's a fantasy. Now it's the core of his funding, now the Syrian opposition, the doctors and the pharmacists. What about that? I mean, President Bush was so accurate, so dead on, and he says, I understand the nature of the enemy. This president won't say the Islamic State is Islamic. This president won't say what happened in Oklahoma City or Fort Hood is terror. We're not at war with ISIS, Steve.
Yeah, this is the big problem, is this president doesn't understand who we're fighting, or if he understands it, he's reluctant to say it. I mean, look at the fight that we've been having in public, that the administration's been having with itself in public over the past 2 weeks about core al-Qaeda and who we're fighting. So now you've got the White House saying this is demonstrably true that core al-Qaeda is decimated.
Explain this, because the Khorasan group were all bin Laden deputies and those that were aligned with him that moved their operation to Syria.
Absolutely, and Tom Jocelyn from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy says that they were ordered by Ayman al-Zawahiri to move from Afghanistan and Pakistan to Syria in order to conduct operations against the West.
But they said in 2012 that it was decimated.
Well, that was false then. It's also false when the White House says it now. And you don't have to take my word for it. Ben Rhodes, who's a top advisor to the president on these issues, said on September 23rd that the Khorasan group includes some former al-Qaeda operatives, core al-Qaeda operatives from Afghanistan and Pakistan, who made their way to Syria. So how can they at once be conducting or planning operations against the West in Syria, having moved from Afghanistan and Pakistan, and at the same time have been destroyed and decimated, which Josh Earnest said yesterday?
Contradictory.
The problem is, this is a PR problem. The White House sees this as a PR problem, a definitional problem, not as a war. And you don't win a war if you're fighting a PR battle.
Remember, the president didn't lift a finger as Ramallah and Fallujah and Tikrit and Mosul were all being decimated.
So far as I can tell, the only foreign policy principle guiding Obama is to never do anything that could get him compared to George W. Bush, even if George W. Bush was right. And I thought the former president was quite restrained in his remarks to Brian, because the reality is that Obama has sent troops back to, or sent people, Americans, back to fight in Iraq. That alone is evidence of a foreign policy failure on the part of the Obama administration. And President Bush was just too much of a gentleman to say that.
He's been quiet the entire 6 years. Yesterday was the one-year anniversary of healthcare.gov. Let me run through a list of issues. A disaster. Even you admit that was a disastrous rollout.
The rollout was
$2 billion later, it's still a disaster. You got the VA, you got the IRS, you got Benghazi, illegal immigration problem that has now every state has illegal immigrants in it. You've got North Africa, Libya, you've got let's see, Afghanistan, Russia, the Ukraine, Crimea, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Gaza. You can go through all of these things. And I'm not even talking about the economy.
So you don't really think he's responsible for Israel and Gaza?
I think he should have stood up for Israel more. I think when 4,000 rockets were fired there, I think, yeah, he could have taken a stronger
You kind of have me for a little bit, and then you start, next thing you know, it's going to be that, like, my dinner wasn't warm enough, and Obama's
No, these are significant issues.
I don't think you can blame him for every single thing that happens in the world.
No, but I think he's a poor leader. And here's what George W. Bush, this to me is revealing, and I want to get your thoughts on it. He says that Obama never calls him. Now, Bush did talk to Clinton. Watch this.
Has President Obama called you?
Well, he called me to tell me that the nation killed Osama bin Laden, or the SEAL Team 6 got Osama bin Laden, for which I was grateful. But no, he's been, he's not on a regular basis, which is okay. It doesn't hurt my feelings.
Right.
And, it's a decision he has made. Look, presidents tend to rely upon the people they're close to. And he's got a team that he has grown close to over the 6 years he's been president, or nearly 6 years, and he relies upon their judgment, and I understand that.
I'm even told by Democrats that he doesn't talk to them either.
Well, it's remarkable what President Bush said, that he doesn't get called by Obama, but it's not really surprising. I mean, humility is not a word that comes to mind when you discuss President Obama. This is a guy who says, I can do any job better than the person I hire to do it. I'm a better speechwriter than my speechwriters. I know more about policy than my policymakers. So, yes, it's not remarkable that someone with that sort of ego doesn't feel the need to call a former president to discuss matters that president has been through.
I also think he doesn't think that George Bush was a good president, and I don't think he thinks that he.
I don't think George Bush thought Bill Clinton was either.
But no, I think that. Well, I don't know about that, actually. But I think that if you look at Clinton and Carter did not have, Carter used to complain that Clinton never called him, and I don't think it's because Clinton really thought Carter was a very good president and really didn't want advice from him. So, I think it probably can be more accounted for
whatever
that.
you think of the policy, whatever you think of the policy of your predecessors, there are things that you could learn from talking to one of the few people in the world who's occupied the same office. And I think the big difference between George W. Bush and Barack Obama, at least in the context of the war on terror and this, George W. Bush, when things in Iraq were going poorly, he listened to people who were criticizing his policy and understood that it wasn't working and acknowledged that it wasn't working. When Barack Obama decided that we were going to conduct airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, he gave a speech in which he doubled down on his failed policies. He boasted in the second paragraph of that speech about withdrawing troops from Iraq and announced that he was going to do it in Afghanistan too. He won't listen. He's unwilling to admit when he's made mistakes.
Look, I get it that you guys love George Bush, okay? I didn't vote for him. I don't have anything against him. I think he's a nice man. But let's not try to recreate him as like the most amazing president of all time.
He won the war, though.
And he didn't. No, he didn't. What did we win?
No.
We didn't win. And wait, I want to go back to what Steve said, though.
We won that war. The surge worked.
He did not do what Steve just said because he didn't fire Donald Rumsfeld until he was absolutely backed into a corner to do it.
And then he did. And then he changed course. And then he changed course.
It was crystal clear, but people were pressuring him and telling him he's got to go. This is not going well.
But he did.
And it was only after he lost. Only after an election.
But he fired Donald Rumsfeld, changed course, and then created a surge war.
And all the gains for 4,000 Americans have been lost under Obama.
You burn the place down, you burn the place down, and then you have a surge that's successful.
But he did it.
Congratulations, great job.
Guys, good to see you. Jason and I are the calm ones on the panel. All right, coming up next tonight on Hannity.
It is my contention that the President of the United States right now is in a full-blown cover-up.
All right, the great one, Mark Levin, was not mincing words on last night's program about the president and what he knew and when he knew it as it relates to the ISIS threat. Coming up next, Senator Lindsey Graham is here to react and explain why he is demanding access to the president's daily intel briefings. And then later, RNC Chair Reince Priebus is here for a Hannity exclusive to explain the GOP strategy for victory in November. That's all coming up on this busy news night tonight. Straight ahead.